Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us in this event. My name is Daniele Fattibene. I work as Research Fellow at the Istituto Affari Internazionali, and I'm very glad to be the chair of this webinar entitled The Role of G20 in Support of the Circular Economy. We're very glad to have many distinguished speakers today with us to share their perceptions and ideas on this topic. Just wanted to say that this webinar is organized in the framework of a research project entitled The Role of G20 in Promoting Global Governance, Challenges and Opportunities of the Italian Presidency in 2021. The project has been funded by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Compagnia San Paolo. And the aim is to contribute to the discussion on the priorities that the Italian presidency of the G20 will address in 2021. The web meeting will discuss the state of play of global initiatives and the potential contribution of G20 countries can make in support of the circular economy, and more generally on sustainable production and consumption modes. And last but not least, this webinar is promoted in the framework of the Festival of Sustainable Development by the Italian Alliance of Sustainable Development. So we have a rich menu of speakers and topics. We'll just briefly introduce them. We will start with welcome addresses by Armando Barucco, Head of Analysis and Planning Unit at the MFA. Then we will go with Nicola Russo Perez from Governance and International Relations of Fondazione Compagnia San Paolo. And then we will have the presentations from our speakers. Let me introduce you Martin Charter, Director of the Center for Sustainable Design from the University of Creative Arts, and Yixin Cheng, Director of Sustainable Innovation Lab. And then we have Jocelyn Blériot, Executive Lead of Institutions, Governments and Cities at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and Professor Enrico Giovannini from the University of Rome, Tor Vergata, and spokesperson of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development. And then we will conclude with my colleague Luca Franza, Head of the Energy and Climate Resources Program at the I, straight after the Q&A sessions. Just two very simple instructions that you may have got used to in this month. Just mute your microphones and use the chat bar for questions or comments. So we will collect them and use them for the Q&A sessions. I spoke already too much, so I give the floor immediately to Armando Barucco from the MFA for the welcome address.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much also for this opportunity, and thanks to all the speakers for actually participating at this event. And as you are aware, this is a part that our chair just explained, is a part of the project financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation and the Compagnia San Paolo, in our case by the Unit for Policy Planning that I currently lead. And this is actually the last of the seminar and the last of the contribution coming, and we will have a wrapping up final moment in the coming weeks. We had until now three seminars. One about the WTO international trade, the other about the digital economy and the future of employment, and the third one was about the challenges of an aging society. And I would say that actually the conclusion, the final seminar that we are having today about circular economy, it couldn't come at a better moment. As you will understand, preparing the priorities of the Italian G20 presidency in such an unprecedented context and with so many challenges coming from something that was totally unpredictable, it was not easy at all. And usually this kind of process requires many months in advance of planning, discussion, etc. So we found ourselves actually in forced to rethink some of the paradigm and the idea that were behind the priorities of the presidency. And I really thank Yai and all the contributors for helping us actually to focus on some issues and to readapt, to readjust, considering the emergency that we went through. And the focus on circular economy that we are actually having, with this focus on better design, product life length, reuse, and the idea that waste at the end of the day is fundamentally a source of raw material, is a sort of natural answer to a new economic paradigm that we all have to think about in the coming decade, and having actually to cope with the challenges coming from the pandemic and from the greatest social and economic crisis from 1929 and the years to come that will have to cope with readjusting our economy and our social system to the new situation. I don't want to speak too much. I've read with a lot of attention the paper, all the papers published in the framework of this project, but I read with particular interest the paper of Professor Charter and Cheng. And there are several issues that I hope will be discussed during the question and answer, also by the same author. For instance, one of them is actually about the possible consequences in terms, for instance, of creation of regional blocks. These has huge consequences in terms of course of policy planning and of course of the way the international order will readjust to the situation coming from the pandemic, and the same concept of globalization and the way that globalization is structured. And I would be very interested to listen to question and answer and the opinion of the speakers about that. I conclude here with just the 3 final remarks. The first one is actually quoting the President of the European Commission, a woman, by the way, Ursula von der Leyen, in which a circular economy will make us less dependent and increase our resilience. And I would say, you know, that the focus on resilience, it is very much also should be also, so our ability to bounce back in front of crisis, but at the same time, you know, the inner strength of our economy and society is a crucial issue and factor to consider in redesigning the way global economy and our internal mode of production are actually organized. The second point is a warning, and has to do with the thing that what I just said about the regional blocks and the regionalization of supply chain. This is something that we must look into details. It's an open discussion. There are several proponents of this. What is important is actually that this doesn't disrupt the way global economy is actually built. Shouldn't become a sort of neo-protectionist kind of approach to actually counter globalization. Globalization must be readjusted, must not be cancelled. And the final point, you know, we find ourselves in a very unfortunate circumstance, a very tragic circumstance. At the same time, from the point of view of Italy and our foreign policy, we find ourselves with a huge responsibility. We will have at the same time the presidency of the G20, in a moment in which all the discussion about the future of global economy will be actually looking at what is discussed in the G20. And at the same time, we are actually holding the co-presidency of the COP26. So we have truly the possibility actually to create synergies and to actually build a framework, a concept about the way that we see global economy in the future, and of course the role of circular economy in that. And I stop here, and sorry for speaking perhaps too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Armando Barucco. I'll give the floor immediately to Nicola Russo Perez from Compagnia di San Paolo.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, and good morning again to all participants. Welcome to all participants. I'm Nicola Russo Perez. I have the pleasure of representing the Fondazione Compagnia San Paolo in today's event. First of all, I would like, of course, to thanks the organizer, thanks to the Istituto Affari Internazionali, a long-term strategic partner of the Compagnia di San Paolo, and thanks also to the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. I'll be very brief. I would like, first of all, to stress really the importance of the strategic partnership between the IAI and the Compagnia di San Paolo, because I think it allows to cover a number of different fields of work of the IAI on a long-term basis. Some of the topics that were addressed in previous workshop were already introduced by Armando Barucco. I would like also to stress the importance of having developed this partnership in the form of a public-private partnership with also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And so let me really express my gratitude to Armando as the head of the policy planning unit at the Ministry for his continuous support and really openness in constantly exploring and developing new forms of cooperation between the foundation sector, the think tanks community, and the public sector that he represents. The cooperation between the Compagnia, the IAI, and the Ministry is very timely, as it has been already said. Italy will host the G20 in 2021. So there is a huge opportunity, I think, for think tanks, for civil society organization, and for the broader scientific and academic community to contribute to the design of the G20 agenda, informing the public debate, but also the policymakers, and those in a way promoting the adoption of more informed, scientific-based, and at the end of the day, more advanced public policies. Just a couple of words on the topic that will be addressed today. Already before the global outbreak of COVID-19, a number of governments and private sector organizations were developing initiatives to promote a circular economic model, a model built on the need, on the one hand, to, let's say, better value resources that are already in use, and on the other hand, to regenerate a natural system as a whole. Even more in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis, or in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis as we are right now. Circular economy approaches have really the potential to play the crucial role in stimulus packages by promoting a green, a low carbon, and circular post-coronavirus economic recovery. This webinar will explore the state of the art concerning policies and instruments in support of a transition towards a circular economy model, both at the national and at the international level. And furthermore, the webinar will provide, as already said, key recommendations for the Italian G20 presidency. And in doing so, it will, I hope, also shed some light on the contribution of circular economy towards the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So let me thanks again all of you for joining us today, and I wish you all a fruitful and inspiring conversation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So I think we can start with the speakers. I'm very glad that in the welcoming remarks we have highlighted that we are living in unprecedented times, and unprecedented challenges and crises require unprecedented choices and action. So I'm very glad to introduce you our first speakers, Martin Chardin and Yixin Chen. They've authored a very interesting study on the potential of circular economy to accelerate this transition. So I'll give the floor to them, and I'll mute myself. I know Martin is sharing a presentation.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the invitation. We're going to split the presentation into two elements. Myself, Martin Charter, will present more of the sort of macro perspective, and then Yixin will go into more specific circular economy, aspects relevant for the presentation. So I'm Martin Charter. I'm Professor of Innovation and Sustainability, 20 years around business and sustainability issues, and within that circular economy. Recently completed a book around, designing for the circular economy, and led some work for DGRTD on looking at product policy and the circular economy. So what we've seen really over the last, 8 to 10 years is a significant growth in the usage of the term circular economy. That has its roots in original work on resource efficiency, resource productivity, and this is from one of the Google tools that maps the use of the term circular economy in search engines. So we've seen this sort of increased usage of the term amongst policy, business, etc. And also, 2015 was a critical year, and we saw in a sense, the recalibration of the Sustainable Development Agenda, but also the launch of the Circular Economy Action Plan in Europe. So I personally very much see circular economy as part of that broader Sustainable Development Agenda, and touches on a number of the SDGs. However, some countries and initiatives seem to be taking a slightly more specific route to this. So what are some of the challenges? Well, we have no global consensus over a definition. That is starting to be worked on in a new ISO standards process development under something called ISO TC 323 that is chaired by the French. And we have the start of one standard now around definitions, of terms, both on a macro level, but also on the sub-level remanufacturing, for example. So there are no global standards on remanufacturing. So terminology is still an issue. It can mean different things to different people. And clearly, for many of us in this area, it's important to think about, the sort of basis of circular economy in the feed into this is either from the biological system or the technical system. There are different issues associated with those material bases. So what again we're seeing, on a global level is sort of emerging discussion around this idea of how we retain value in products, materials, and components in economic and social systems for as long as possible. So how do we create that value, within systems? But however, the vast majority of the world still are at a level of thinking about waste management and recycling. So we've got quite a significant gap in terms of, the thinking as such. So in many ways, the discussion is, at that level of value is no longer about waste. That's sort of about reframing the discussion. So really, we've seen the G20 countries are responsible for more than 2/3 of global material use. We've seen a substantial, a tripling of material use in the G20 over the last 20 years. And what I should say is I won't necessarily touch on all the detail because this is in the follow-up paper. So materials use is very much linked to climate change, and essentially resource efficiency within a circular approach has a potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60%. And so potentially if we're thinking about things like repair of products, well, again, by developing systems to enable increased repair, we're not in effect having to create new products. We're looking at product life extension, and that can substantially reduce CO2 emissions and therefore connect to climate change. And there is a need for a lot more work on connecting the two issues and the interrelationships. So on a broader issue, the impact since March, April, of COVID, well, certainly we've seen a little bit of this acceleration of the block issue. The regional block issue was mentioned at the start and linked very much to reshoring in certain countries and within certain companies, and particularly this perhaps a reduction in the over-reliance on China. And I'll pick up a little bit on this shortly. But what we've also seen, as another impact from COVID is the increasing problems with, increased consumables, masks, etc., and now washing up around the world, and very much that linked to ocean marine plastics. That's also becoming a global issue across a number of countries and blocks. So, whilst we have, in Europe, the Single-Use Plastics Directive and similar things emerging in places like Canada, we've got this increase of, issues associated with that from COVID. So in terms of state of circular economy, we've seen the launch of the Circular Economy Action Plan 2.0 at the end of the first quarter. We're seeing Italy, as was mentioned, really taking circular economy on board in terms of the presidency. Finland, longer term plans, but also hosting the World Circular Economy Forum, 1,000 people coming together. Again, indeed, the online event is I think, next week, maybe. The Dutch very much taking a very pragmatic and proactive role in circular economy, and a number of other initiatives in Europe. In Asia, very much we've seen Japan, leading on resource efficiency and productivity, but only really engaging in the term circular economy very recently, whilst hosting one of the World Circular Economy Forum meetings in Yokohama a couple of years ago. So what we've also seen is a number of countries starting to utilize different demand and supply side policy tools to try and stimulate that transition to a circular economy. And that may be within taxation instruments, looking at things like reduced VAT to enable repair in Sweden and Austria, through to other countries starting to experiment with how one integrates circularity into public procurement to stimulate the demand side. Within Europe, we had back in November, December 2015, the launch of the Circular Economy Action Plan, and that sort of moved forward a series of actions, and particularly of note there is the plastic strategy. The Circular Economy Action Plan 2.0 very much is focused on bringing out a focus on value chains and bringing new sectors into that, such as textiles and clothing, and also this link with Europe to the sort of broader global agenda. So just in closing the first section of this, what we're really highlighted in the paper is a number of cross-cutting issues. So very much this link between circularity and eco-design, in that 80% of a product's environmental impact is determined at the design and development stage. So you cannot design for repairability unless you're bringing in at that early stage in the design and development. Increasing concerns, particularly in the technical system, electronics, for example, around built-in product obsolescence, but that also perhaps goes, into, areas even like fast fashion. So how do we build repair, systems to extend the life of products, materials, and components? Remanufacturing, there's potentially a lot of economic value there, and how do we stimulate that, particularly at a regional level? We're seeing China experiment with this in the east of China. And lastly, and perhaps touching on a point by the initial comment, is this need for a systemic approach, not just at a sort of national level or a block level, but also at a regional level, and how we develop the sort of ecosystems at a city or a region level to retain that value in those regional societies and economies. And that may be economic, but it also may be societal. So very much, topics, for example, like industrial symbiosis projects, but also things like repair cafes, that is bringing the social and as Chatham House in their report highlighted, the sort of idea of the just, transition to a circular economy. So in certain cities in Europe now, we have maybe upwards of 30 different repair cafes where civil society is working to repair products. So very much this regional focus. So I'll finish there. Sorry, that was a fast run through things, a lot of information in the paper, but I'll now pass across to Ichi.
Thank you, Martin and the chairman's introductions. Greeting from Taiwan. I currently resent Taipei from the UK for a family visit. I co-author with Martin on this study. Next one. And in the second half of our presentation, I will focus on international initiatives and the collaborations, and including trade and the finance institution. Then I will focus on our recommendation and conclusion. So if we look at I developed the global transformation CE from 3R, reduce, reuse, recycle, to 12R a couple of years ago. But even today, the implementation of the comprehensive approach to CE still very limited. Next one. So we look at one of the key issue and the key challenge is around trade, international trade, and the finance instrument. We look at into the trade-related obstacles, including WTOs, then such as export restrict. We have some of the challenge around export restriction on the secondary material, secondary goods, and also used products. If we look into the finance sector, it's also very early stage, but we know it's going to play the key role in this shift into the global CE. So there's already have a lot of initiatives around, including European Investment Bank, and also have some of the initiatives around circular economy, like a joint initiative on circular economy to try to explore and also engage with stakeholders, find out the knowledge of gap. Currently, we look into the global initiative. We look through our research, we found many of them which has some of a linkage with sustainable resource management. But one of the, we don't have time to go to detail, but also we look into pace, and also World Circular Economy Forum, and including Ellen MacArthur Foundation's the EC 100 initiative, all have a very strong platform to initiate, to accelerate global CE action. So next one, so I won't go to the details. So if next one, please. And we've looked within the G20 framework, even since 2017, German G20 already start have the sustainable resource management. But currently we move forward into the more into circular economy plus climate change initiative. So in the past 3 years, within G20 really focus on plastic, especially some of the marine plastic initiative that connect to the UN as well. Next one. So we can use those platforms to look into what's the actually the main, use the current working group to actually expand the circular economy action. So one of the, on this stage, we want to have some of the short-term urgent initiative we have to address, especially in the post-pandemic economic situation now. We have to, if we want to mainstream CE, we have to really connect into the border policy priority, including economic recovery and the social resilience in the climate constraint and the increasing digital and automated world. So we have to all connect all of those dots together to actually, through the Green Deal or Green Recovery, building to the CE and those circular economy and the climate change into our recovery plan. Next one. And then one of the key issues Martin already mentioned is definition and how we standardize the term, and also how we measure the circularity almost is an urgent need. So G20 has to work close with the ISO and also some of the international organizations like IEC to develop a standardized term and the measurement, including monitoring framework. Next one. Our third conclusion has to have develop decarbonization through the industry and also through the climate change work, there is one of the key issues we have to look into is on the industry side, looking some of the demand side of the technology. We talk about a lot in the past climate change about a lot of about renewable energy, but really on the demand side of the approach is quite important, normally forgot, is including like material efficiency, eco-design, reduce of material waste, and the substitute of the some of the low carbon and high carbon material for the high carbon material. So those are in those areas we have a lot of opportunity to develop a circular economy plus climate change world of the change. So if we're looking into also, we need to also have a prioritized industry sector. Currently, go through our study, we recommend some of the most environmental impact and also very, very important for both developing countries and the advanced countries. So we recommend agriculture, water and food, circularity, construction and building, textile, clothing and fashion, ICT sector. Next one. Also, that's very important. We look into not only short-term priority, we also need to look into mid-term and the long-term systemic changes. One of the key areas we suggest that has to look in, G20 should promote some of the circular economy pilot project and the accelerated network. Through those coordinated commitment, will give the signal to the business and also investment community to give the future CE pathway, and also we can increase international coordination in this we call post-globalization world. Next one. They're also very important. We have to provide economic instrument and incentives. As we know, there's a lot of, in the global level, that's the only way we can do through this current world and also international cooperation. One of the key things OECD policy guidelines suggest is including we tax on virgin material products and also tax on carbon. So based on those key instrument on the policy, then we can give some signal into the market. For example, if we have a landfill disposal, landfill tax and pollution tax, then what people will have to design in the first place to reduce all of those waste in the system. Next one. So very important, we also have to work with developing countries, especially high population countries like India and China, and also Nigeria, all of the Southeast Asia countries, because they will play a very, very important role for the future consumption and production. Next one. And then the final suggestion, we have the strong link, connect circular economy with the SDG goals, because in the beginning we know all of the current challenge will lead into sustainable development goal if we cannot connect with circular economy into SDG goal. We were falling apart with our goal. Currently, for example, circular economy have the 10 out of the 17 connect to a circular economy, and within the SDG have the 3 important goal, which is enabling of a circular economy. So we think that those are our very, very short and also long-term recommendation for our research. Now, we can go through some of the more details in the paper and also Q&A section. Thanks.
So thank you. I just wanted to add one other point linked to the request right at the beginning. It's a critical issue also in a European context, is that Europe has access to few raw materials. So Commission now have identified, I think, 28 critical raw materials. So there's going to be an issue about how we retain and regenerate those materials at a regional and national level, linked to that idea of resilience of supply chain. So thank you very much, and I'll pass back to the chairman and come out of my PowerPoint or our PowerPoint.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the authors for this interesting presentation. The paper is very dense, and we will have the chance later to, touch upon some of the issues you mentioned. I'll give the floor now to Jocelyn. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation has been for years one of the front runners of this quest for a regenerative, different model of society, not only economics. So they have authored a very nice paper on the effects of COVID-19 on circular economy. So giving me the floor to Jocelyn for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the kind invitation, and I also thank the Italian ministries involved in this very important project in the run-up to G20. So I'm very fortunate that both Martin and Etienne have contributed to really set the scene in a perfect way, and in a way, it feels almost like part of my homework has been done by them. So something that my 10-year-old self would have been ecstatic about, which also means that I can probably shave off a couple of minutes, which is a good news for everyone. What I would like to first of all start with is a quick reminder that the circular economy is first and foremost, at least in our view, an innovation and competitiveness agenda. It really is at the heart of what it is. Its most important feature is really the capability to propel the economy of the 21st century into a low carbon, thriving, distributed and inclusive one. So it does rest on three principles, which are design, out, waste and pollution, which is keep products and materials in circulation, and which is also regenerate and build natural capital. There's another way to look at this. It would be to say, circular economy, if you look at the material side of this, is about feedstock, it's about process, and it's about business models. So feedstock is the nature and the volumes of what gets put into the economy. The process includes the design, and Martin really brilliantly elaborated on this, the upstream strategies that allow value retention, such as design for remanufacturing, disassembly, etc. The business model really is about how do you favor access over ownership, which means how do you move from creating value by consuming finite materials because you're in the take, make, waste logic, and you give access to the service that the product provides, where you can therefore treat your products in your fleet of assets as material banks that stay in the economy. And that's a really important part. So really circular economy, it's about looking at value creation mechanisms that move away from extraction. So in other words, we would consider it's a model that builds rather than one that depletes. Now, over the past few years, as Martin was saying, we've seen the circular economy gain traction massively, both at private sector and policymaker level. So the EU Commission is, of course, the example that comes to mind, because we're now within the boundaries of the second Circular Economy Action Plan. But let's not forget that China had circular economy enshrined in law since 2008. And actually, if you look before 2010 and do a Google search, the circular economy term almost only brings you back to Chinese legislation. Business leaders are making circular economy a part or even the core of their strategies, as we've seen, and public authorities at all levels are starting to take action in the wake of the EU action plan for a lot of member states, but as well independently. And we see this, for instance, with countries like Chile currently working on a national roadmap, and there are more examples, of course. It appears that the model really is more relevant than ever. Of course, the call for a system reset and that investment, and I'm talking about investment in very broad terms, in circular economy strategies, predates the COVID-19 pandemic. But as we've seen, the strategies of circular economy are even more relevant because the pandemic has revealed a lot of brittleness in the supply chain. And it has also revealed, when it comes to the food system, the inherent reliance on labor that comes from outside of national borders. We've seen a lot of crops go to waste simply because the movement of that labor within European countries was prevented due to health considerations leading to border closures. And it has been a major source of concern for citizens. Lockdowns hastily implemented in cities, leading to big worries about food supply, panic buying, and all of this within the overarching context of a massively, let's say, stressful climate when it comes to health considerations, which led people to want to know more about where their food came from, how it was produced. And we've seen a massive rise in local food schemes, which is an interesting thing. And regenerative agricultural practices in peri-urban environment, which are at the heart of the biocycle side of the circular economy, certainly have been put on the forefront of the scene. As the chair kindly mentioned, we have published a series of insight papers pertaining to the relevance of circular economy in the post-COVID recovery period. These concerned 5 sectors, which are food, built environment, mobility, plastics, textiles, plus a specific paper that talks about recommendations for policymakers and where, in the context of massive stimulus packages, the investment should go. And there's a running theme across all of these, which is that the infrastructure and for reuse and collection, which of course is enabled by design, is absolutely key if we want to keep these resources in circulation. There's a scarcity element, of course, that Martin alluded to, and which is absolutely critical. And you could argue actually circular economy as an idea spawns from that notion of hedging ourselves against supply risks. But we can see that really it's more critical than ever to address pollution, to address the displacement of virgin materials, which means if we do away with the need of virgin materials, we do away with a lot of the associated externalities such as water pollution, GHG emissions, etc. And this is why the material side of the economy is so important when it comes to climate mitigation. We've also seen the number of private market funds with circular economy focus grow from 1 only in 2018 to 10 by the first half of 2020, which is a staggering evolution when you think in just a year and a half to see that number rise. By the way, ESG funds have also outperformed anything on the market for the past 6 months, which really means that there's a strong wake up from the financial community here. There is a policy agenda fit as well for circular economy. 2021 is going to be a key year because of the pandemic, of course, but also because of COP15 biodiversity in China and COP26, of which Italy is co-president together with the UK. It's now only 9 years left to the SDGs due date and well into the drive to deliver on the Paris Agreement. Now, in terms of leadership, I mean, it's clear that the G20 has a leadership role, and it is and has been so far very important, starting when it comes to circular economy with Germany, putting circular economy on the agenda through the plastics lens. But Italy, Japan, Saudi Arabia, all of these countries have pushed the idea. And at national level, Italy, which came up with a strategy itself called Towards a Model for Circular Economy for Italy, Overview and Strategic Framework, that was published in 2017. And before that has been involved in the European Resource Efficiency Platform starting in 2012, which eventually gave birth to the first circular economy package, is really well placed to keep those issues at the center of the stage, but make even a better case for it. There's a work that has been going on at the Resource Alliance level with the G20, with crossovers with the G7. There's work on plastics that we've been involved in with the global commitment. We've also contributed very recently to the marine plastic litter report that was centralized and published by the Japanese presidency. And that leadership is really important within countries, but it's also a cross-cutting and a global agenda. And circular economy goes beyond materials management. The Italian presidency of the G20 could really help broaden that scope. Because, and I'll finish on that note, we could be under the illusion that there is now a straightforward choice between linear and circular, because circular economy has a lot of exposure, visibility, but the fact is, the system is still hardwired for and by linearity. All the cost structure of the economy, the incentives drive throughput, volume growth, and incentives that are based on selling more and more stuff. And until we address the fundamentals of the system, we are going to implementing just circular economy plugins grafted onto a linear system, and which means that we're never going to get to where we want to. So if I was going to do a call for action for the Italian presidency, it would be to really look beyond the materials management, which is a key element, of course, but talk about the fundamentals of the system, the business models aspect. We see, for instance, that when it comes to GHG emissions, it is more impactful to mutualize the assets. Let's take the example of a car. The biggest gains to be made are throughout the life cycles of the car if it allows to give access to a multiple number of users to mobility. And that's much more impactful than just refining the production process by using a bit less and by making more efficient vehicles. Over the course of the lifetime of the vehicle, the biggest impact on emission is going to be through business models. But these business models are still few and far between. And it is a bit counterintuitive. It's not an industrial strategy as such. And this is why we need to move the discourse into that side of things. We're beyond the technicality of a circular economy. It's a project for society. It's a project for globalization. Trade will be a very important part of it as well. So broadening the scope, giving it an international dimension really is what the Italian presidency of the G20 could do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn, for these inspiring words. We really need to work at the core of the problem. Let me introduce you the final speaker for today, Professor Nico Giovannini, spokesperson of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development. Since I know it will leave, I anticipate my question to him. It seems to me that, and this is a worrisome trend, during the crisis and the emergency of the COVID-19, the SDGs were not used as the main policy framework for guiding actions, initiatives, and policies at the national level. How do we work to make this decade not a lost decade, but really a decade for action towards sustainability? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this very interesting webinar. The short answer is copy what the European Union is doing and further improve what European Union is doing. But as many speakers have said, of course, it's much more complicated than that. Let me try to fly a little bit high, sharing with you some ideas that I've been trying to promote, even when I was at the OECD between 2001 and 2009 as a chief statistician. It's quite clear at this stage that we need some fundamental changes in the way in which we measure the reality. We are talking about circular economy, and in a circular economy context, if a company cuts dramatically the costs for raw materials and intermediate goods and so on and so forth. And to do that, it requires more people. The unit labor cost, which is the most used indicator of competitiveness around the world, shows a worsening of the situation, even if the total costs improve. Does it make any sense? I would say no. This is just one little example of the fact that our national account systems, our measurement systems are not fit for purpose in this new context. Sustainability is about measuring stocks, because stocks of capital, not only economic capital, but also natural capital, as it was underlined before, human capital, as we can see during this pandemia, and social capital are those elements that link the current generation with the future generations. And the level of quality of this data is really very poor, especially in less developed countries. But even in developed countries, we are facing a lot of problems here. And statisticians, I know them very well, of course, being part of the community of chief statisticians for many years, are intrinsically conservative, especially in Europe, as any modification of national accounts is seen as a correction of a mistake. And this is not seen as a positive thing by politicians. In 2002, when I was chief statistician of the OECD, I wrote to the other custodians of national accounts, IMF, World Bank, UN, and so on, flagging the fact that until that moment, expenditures in research and development were recorded as a cost. So an increase in research and development was making the GDP reducing, not increasing. And of course, that approach didn't have any sense in the modern economy context. So I think that we are in a similar situation. And what I would ask Italy, as Italy has been really at the forefront of the measurement of these elements, Italy to be bold on that and ask the G20 to ask the custodians of national accounts exactly now, because this is the moment in which national statisticians are thinking about modifying the system of national accounts that will stay for 20 years, more or less, to push statisticians to revise quite radically some of the principles that are the basis of national accounts. It looks very technical, but just to tell you that this is very political, I would suggest you to read the book, The Power of a Single Number, that describes how in 1944, the US Department of Commerce made exactly this kind of initiative to impose to the rest of the world, especially the capitalistic part, standard settings for national accounts to demonstrate that capitalism was producing more stuff than communism. And unfortunately, we are still stuck with this kind of principles. So my plea would be, first of all, about a political initiative without which we will have only marginal changes in the systems of national accounts. The second point is about, of course, circular economy. As it was said a few minutes ago, we would need a WTO able really to make a jump in this perspective, but we know the state of the art. We know very well that in terms of sustainability, the cross-border effects of unsustainable behaviors are huge. And again, this is a problem of measurement, of course, but is also a problem of policies, mainly a problem of policies. Anyway, just to continue on what I said before, more transparency on this transboundary effect of unsustainabilities, including social unsustainabilities through migration and through other problems, conflicts and so on, would be extremely welcome in order to make citizens more aware of what is going on. The third point is really political, and as you have said, this is really a minefield, because of course, we have to see what happens with the American elections and so on. But even if there will be a change, I think that the starting of the new administration will be slow in this respect. And maybe the differences between Republicans and Democrats. There isn't any big idea on the table at the UN General Assembly. And again, here, Europe has a special responsibility to make the overall agenda advancing through the G20 discussions. I know, as I said, that this is a minefield, but every year we delay some actions in this perspective is a year lost towards a movement in the right direction, as problems will become more and more global, as the very nice cartoon that I also use very frequently on the different waves of tsunamis demonstrate. Very last point I would like to make is about resilience. The first intervention was underlining the importance of resilience. The report published by the European Commission 2 weeks ago, if I well remember, about strategic foresight and resilience made me extremely happy, not only because the report and the political messages fully incorporate the work that I contributed to do at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission on the issue of resilience. Let me share with you an anecdote. I was consultant to the think tank of the President Juncker in 2015 and 16, and I was told by the head of the cabinet that I had to stop talking about the 2030 agenda and this crazy idea of building policies for minimizing vulnerability and resilience that we started at the UNDP in 2014. And the reason why he said that was exactly because of the complexity of the system thinking. And second, because he said there is no way for politicians to go in front of people and saying the future will be full of shocks. Therefore, we need to reduce vulnerability and increase resilience. Of course, after 4 years, I would say 2-0 is the score of the game, because not only European Union has adopted 2030 agenda as a reference, but because now the work that we have done more at technical level is being recognized as a very important at political level, and especially the concept of transformative resilience, which is exactly the opposite of bouncing back, as I heard before, where we were. We want to bounce back only if we were in a sustainable development path, and we were not, of course. I don't like either the building back better, which is the standard wording in the Anglo-Saxon world and in UN. I prefer, and I'm happy that documents accept this, of transformative resilience, which means that you bounce forward, not back. And this is, I think, exactly the dilemma that political leaders have in front of them. In the framework we developed at the JRC, we propose to go over policies that are classified according to economic, social, and environmental phenomena, to use a new classification of policies aimed at protecting from shock, promoting preparation of shocks, preventing shocks, preparing for shocks, and transforming after a shock. The report published by Eurostat, by the European Commission, is accompanied by some preliminary dashboards of indicators for sustainability, for vulnerability and resilience. Well, I think that the G20, the Italian Presidency, can take up this kind of ideas and eventually share with the G20 members to rethink about the overall policies. I stop here. Thank you very much for your patience. I have to run to another meeting. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Professor Giovannini, and thank you for being here. We know that this is a hectic week for the festival, so we appreciate you were with us. We can start with the Q&A sessions. I have some remarks for the speakers, but you can use the chat bar. I've seen someone already writing comments, and then we can start questions or comments for the speakers. So we can start from, the other way around. So my first question would go to Jocelyn, and then the other to Etienne and Martin. Jocelyn, you said very rightly that we are living in a context where the model that has been built is depleting resources rather than building new resources. You also mentioned the importance of the fact that fundings and incentives are not fit for purpose. So my two questions are, how do we convince politically all the stakeholders, the economic stakeholders, the political stakeholders, the civil society, that circular economy is something that brings innovations, but also, opportunities and, advantages, because it bears cost maybe in the short term. And the second question is, what is the role of local governance in that? I mean, the European Union has launched this mission for climate neutral and smart cities with 100 climate neutral cities by 2050. What is the role of local governance in that? And then the question for Martin and Etienne regards something that you highlighted really well, the importance of designing and importance of measuring. How do we convince the businesses that they need to reshape their business models to start from scratch? So start from a completely different design of products that entails circularity in its roots. And then how do we standardize in a very complex multilateral system standards and methods of measurements to have a clear standard for circular economy that fits and is targeted to the different contexts where we live with different political expectations and different economic situations.
Right, well, thank you very much for that, Daniele. I think there are very important questions that we could spend a lot of time on, so obviously I'm not going to do that, but let's go to your first one. Yes, how do we convince stakeholders that there is a need to change the system? Well, first of all, there's a physical reality to it. There's the notion that some stocks of critical materials are depleting fast. We know that there is a need in order to move to a renewable energy system, but also to electrify the transport system. There is a need for critical materials that are in short supply already. So from the start, there will be an absolute necessity to design those processes and those strategies, whether they are production strategies or business model strategies, in a different way, because this will not be a discovery further down the line. We already know that what we have to play with is not enough. Secondly, I think you mentioned the notion of short-term costs. which might well be the case. At the same time, if you look midterm and even worse long terms, the cost of not doing it is just way too big. And people, especially the financial community, which I think is playing a massively important role in this, are really acutely aware of this. This is why you see every day new calls for disclosure of climate exposure for companies by financial institutions that say, we need to have a view on this because we can't invest and have visibility on the future of your operations if we don't know how you're exposed to these risks that are systemic. So there is that notion as well that it is important, and that's a long-standing debate, but at the heart of the structure and the cost structure of the economy is the need to integrate negative externalities, of course, because if it's free to pollute, if it's free to deplete, then that's an incentive to carry on with business as usual. But we are hitting the buffers on a lot of things. We've seen it in the plastics sector specifically. We see that as well when it comes to things such as batteries for the electrification of vehicles that really lend themselves to those circular economy strategies. It's interesting that both China and the European Union have put circularity at the heart of their strategy for the batteries because they're in short supply, they need to come back. There is so I could go on, but let me move to the second part of your question, which you will have to remind me of actually, because I did note it down, but
was asking about the role of local governments in
yes,
in the circular economy.
Yes, and absolutely. I mean, cities are where the innovation happens, are where all the consumption happens as well. Everything flows through cities, and not much of use or value actually gets out. If you look at biological level, the amount of food that gets consumed and what actually goes back is negligible. So you disrupt the nutrient cycle by not putting stuff back to the soil where it should be. And that's one example only. And Italy, again, is leading the way with the organic matter collection schemes. It's really clear in Milan. The valuation and the valorization of those organic nutrients is a key thing that cities can do because they are the point of reception and the point of consumption of all the values that flows out of the countryside into the cities, and a municipal policy designed to make the best use of these resources is absolutely critical, and that happens at local level. The same can be said about built environment and how we implement those strategies. The renovation wave, is it going to be a circular economy driven renovation wave of buildings? Are there going to be any specific schemes that incentivize the multiple user business model type of things that we see? Because, you know, it's still staggering to see that even in Europe today, even during business hours and even before the pandemic, the average use of an office building was only 60%. We have overcapacity in road and infrastructure for private vehicles that sit idle 92% of the time. These things are really at the heart of what a municipal team and local policymakers can really implement and change.
Ichin, Martin, your turn.
Ladies first.
Yes.
Ichin? Unmute.
Yes.
Okay, great. I think that one of the, I will leave the standardizations, the things to Martin to address, but I would like to discuss some of the issue is more bigger scope as we discuss along the line. I think the first, if we discuss on the competitiveness, the issues with circular economy, from my experience with especially I live in the Asia and then serve on the European Commission on the Horizon 2020 in the past six years on the industry leadership. And one of the key things I bring up the circular economy is actually exactly the competitiveness issues and also R&D issues. And then because we use some of the examples in this part of the world, like Japan, who's already implement circular economy for 40 years plus. And then one of the key reasons they start that early is exactly resource constraints. And the issue we discussed about critical raw materials. And then they develop a whole long-term strategy for actually keep the countries and from also the companies level to be able to actually compete in the global level, because we see the critical raw material, the China control 70 to 80% of them depend on what kind of material you are talking about. So now Japan, after all of those years efforts, they can achieve 70 to 80% metals recycle rate, and then plus all other advanced technology. So they are the #1 holding the IP of circular economy technology IP at the moment, and China is catching up on that. So start from the environmental issue, and actually more and more the country, including European Commission, look at circular economy is not only about the environmental issue, it's about security issue, it's about competitiveness issue. And it's all overall also global issue. You look into one of the PowerPoint I put into. Go through this COVID-19 world. It's basically we see the next wave is the economic recession. Then we look into potential next one is climate change. And then is resource constraint. Then biodiversity loss. So we see the COVID-19 just give us a think time. Look into how the world will look into in the probably 10 times speed. So we can look into circular economy as actually the way out of also the COVID-19 and also economy recession. At the same time of also climate change impact. So we need to look into the big picture, then we can see this issue is not only about environmental or certain small detail. It's actually about competitiveness issue. One of the projects I work for one of the leading brand companies a couple of years ago. One is the smartphone, and then they are already achieved. They don't need to have a new mind probably anymore from their future products. So this is also for them in the heart of their competence. They don't want to rely on the certain resource. So they develop a strategy for a long period of time to actually get all of the future material from the manufacturer, from the e-waste. So that's why we say we need to have a longer term. It's about business competitiveness. It's about economic recovery. So I stop here. Pass to Martin.
Okay. Thank you all. So I'll just try and pick up a couple of points here, stuff that's not points that maybe others haven't made. So I think on the competitive issue, you know, whilst China had the circular promotion law in 2008, they've got a slightly fragmented approach to it in reality, although they at a high level, you know, they're committed. And the agenda is going a bit up and down. So they have a remanufacturing zone that was very high profile, then it's gone down, then it's coming up again. So and also we got to remember, despite, you know, the system there's 28 provinces, and in a project I'm doing at the moment, for example, Ireland is smaller than any Chinese province. So we're dealing with a huge issue of scale there. In Japan, they hadn't really started to use the word circular economy, but they have this depth of knowledge, you know, going back many, you know, into the 80s and 90s. And just a quick vignette there is I organized maybe 2008-ish an expert group to go over to Japan, and I chose very European-wise, carefully, you know, the team being, you know, looking at the system and the different skills. and the equivalent Japanese experts all had minute, detailed knowledge of materials, recycling, remanufacturing, etc. So, you know, their detailed approach means that they have a lot more knowledge about this. And also they had these recycling factories from, you know, the early to mid 90s in electronics and automotive. So I think that also touches on the issue, and so the other side of the equation, of course, is in the present incumbency in the US side, we're seeing no leadership on this issue and little engagement apart from probably, you know, West Coast and in that sense East Coast, where we'd see the innovations coming in normally in the US, irrespective of any federal position. So there will be stuff in the States, but it's not going to be a high level. But touching on this again, you know, we've two other points. It's how we build the infrastructure for a transition to a circular economy, and that's in that sense the hard stuff. So remanufacturing factories are different from forward manufacturing factories. How do we do that? How do we stimulate that, et cetera, if we believe that's important? But also the social dimension of this and how we facilitate this. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the big growth from civil society of repair cafes that are really dealing with this issue of resilience in communities. And you know, once we start to do the math on this, these are making some quite big impacts in terms of product life extension and CO2 emissions, etc. So, but as was said right at the very beginning, and yes, it's about resilience, but it's also about innovation and new ways of thinking, and that's a very important part of this. And it means unthinking and rethinking certain things and how we bring this into education, you know, at all levels, including executive, very important. And I think the other key issue in the European context that both panelists mentioned was R&D. So the need, particularly for the Commission and national government level, to invest a lot more in R&D around materials innovation. So things like shape memory plastics and alloys that came on board when we thought it was going to be designed for repairability, integrated into the WE and the end-of-life vehicles directive, you know, so in effect materials that can enable disassembly at the end of life. A lot of work in the 2000s, but then it's dissipated. Secondly, we're seeing more work on renewable materials happening. So for example, cactus-based leather emerging in South America, you know, on the bio side. So how do we increase our innovation in that area and stimulate that? At a local governance level, particularly regions are going to be very important in this if we're really going to retain that value in systems. So we need to look at, you know, in different countries, we have different attitudes towards regional government. UK under the Conservative government whenever they came under Cameron, in effect, you know, dissolved the regional governments. But of course, in Italy, you know, Spain, very strong. So big issues about how you build the innovation, the remanufacturing factories, you know, and also we're going to see after the furlough schemes, you know, reduced throughout Europe, unemployment. How can we bring people, you know, into the circular economy, you know, in terms of this just jobs agenda or just employment, particularly with the older generation?
Yes.
As well. So, and just finishing quickly, you know, the chair. So there needs to be plans at level to do that, and the, in a sense, the directors of regional initiatives, the mayors of cities, and even down to the level of the mayors of towns, and you know, and the town clerks, etc., need to have more on this. In terms of standardization, I encourage, you know, the Italian Presidency and national countries through their standardization bodies and their experts to get involved in ISO TC 323. There are 4 standards that are, you know, are now really starting, but there's a significant let's say, significant variation in the knowledge around circularity thinking. So 4 standards are to be developed, and we need good thinking and very pragmatic thinking. It's going to take a long time, but at this moment there's a huge amount of interest in it, but it's going to be a complicated process. Business models, a lot of discussion, in the literature and thinking is circular economy always drives, new business models, etc. So no, it doesn't. It can do, absolutely. And I think we need to separate out this issue of the transition towards more circular approaches in processes, products, and new business in a large company perspective. Large organizations are complex, and it takes time to do these things. You have to start, and there has to be consistent messages from the top about what circularity means for the organization. There's been a number of cases where that hasn't happened, and that's led to dissipated and confusing, almost conflicting initiatives within organizations. So clear messages. I think absolutely important to look at that and shape that to different products and markets associated with different companies, but also where I see the real opportunity is in new startups that haven't got the problems with these embedded systems, and they're fresh and open to new ideas. So I think particularly, to have platforms in place to stimulate startups in this area and look at the scalability of startups. Again, many experiments, small initiatives out there. I've particularly been looking at a very vertical area of creating products from waste fishing nets, and found quite a lot of examples of initiatives and ideas, but few commercial companies that are selling, products. So that's just a very vertical example, but there's a need to create the right infrastructure to change the problem into an opportunity. So like others, I can go on and on, but I'm not going to bore you with that, so I'll shut up.
Thanks a lot, Martin. I think that what you said, being clear with the messages and being transparent about the cost, but most of all about the cost of inaction, as just Len said, is crucial to educate people and to bring forward this radical change that we all need. We're running out a little bit of time, but I really want to give the floor to my colleague Luca Franza, head of the Energy, Climate and Resources Program at the IE, for concluding remarks. I also thank the audience. I've seen on the right, on the chat part, there has been a discussion on KPIs and sustainability as a KPI. And so I think we will have time in the future for delving much more into this topic. So I thank again the speakers, and I give the floor to my colleague Luca.
Yes, I really would like to join Daniele in thanking everyone for having been part of this extremely informative webinar. I think this was an extremely thought-provoking exercise that really made us realize, or at least it made me realize, really how circular economy is at the crossroads of many different policy areas, and how circular economy is at the center of some of the key trends of today. First of all, the emergence of new business models. I think all the interventions that we've heard today contributed to create a pretty distinct perception that going forward, economic value is going to move away from heavy industrial activities, manufacturing and resource extraction. And I think that in recent times, we've really learned that value added can actually migrate to new sectors. Of course, a lot still needs to be done because the incentives are not currently properly designed to circular economy initiatives. And in this sense, what Mr. Blériot said really resonated. Another trend I think that is very much related to circular economy discussions is that of the growing importance of finance, of financial players in really helping us pushing ethical agendas, if you like. We already see how financial players are driving, for example, the energy transition, renewable energy has become a safe haven to a large extent. The discussion on stranded assets is very, very important. So I think that looking ahead, it's going to be very important to make sure that financial players can also boost circular economy initiatives as they are already boosting energy transition. Thirdly, another very important trend that is relevant here is the work that is currently being done around the world to establish new industrial strategies, new industrial policies. And I think that a big opportunity is created here by the unprecedented amount of public money that is being mobilized by plans to recover from COVID-19. So this is also a great opportunity to kickstart new circular economy initiatives. The fourth big trend that I wanted to highlight and that I extracted a little bit from the discussion is the link between circular economy and the very large geo-economic reshufflings that are taking place around the world, notably reshufflings in international trade. The current discussions on reshoring and the shortening of the value chains are very, very important. And in a way, they can create momentum for circular economy. Although the other side of the coin here is that we also observe pretty worrying protectionist tendencies and autarky, as Minister Baruco, for example, said. So we really need to strike a balance between the two ambitions, I think. Obviously, the importance of circular economy for climate change, it really cannot be, or the fight against climate change, it can't be underestimated. I was very pleased to read in the paper by Professors Charter and Cheng references to carbon capture and storage and critical material reuse. It's going to be critical to recycle batteries if we want a bigger uptake of renewable energy, but also energy efficiency. All the scenarios also from the IEA point to the fact that adopting new renewable energy is not going to be enough to cut our CO2 emissions. We also really need to improve energy efficiency. And finally, I would say something that I got, a takeaway that I got from this very informative webinar is that circular economy really calls into question deeply entrenched socio-economic patterns. So I think it actually touches also on areas such as psychology and anthropology. I think consumerism is really deeply entrenched in all of us, perhaps more than we are willing to admit. And so we really need to address the fundamentals of socio-economic organization, as also Mr. Blériot rightfully highlighted. So precisely because circular economy is so cross-cutting, we really need to connect circular economy and mainstream circular economy in broader policy issues, as also Professor Cheng highlighted. Another element that I really got from this webinar is that there's ample room for win-win. So circular economy doesn't only help sustainability, but crucially, it can create economic opportunities, and also in the paper, a lot of interesting figures are quoted. However, I think we also need to be aware, and this has been touched upon, that there are possible reshufflings coming from circular economy approaches, as some countries whose export revenues depend heavily on manufactured goods might be concerned. And that's why it's so important, as Professor Cheng highlighted, to work with the developing countries. A lot of measures have been discussed in terms of regulatory interventions, economic measures, but also high politics, as for example, Professor Giovannini highlighted. I also found very interesting the point on the need for better statistics and data. My final word is on the fora where circular economy can be promoted. It has emerged from this webinar how the G20 is really an important, a key forum to push forward this agenda. It accounts for 60% of material use, but also I would like to add 80% of global greenhouse gas emission. It has been highlighted how the Italian presidency is really a very good opportunity. Mr. Blériot highlighted, for example, how Italy has been doing well in a number of indicators. I'd like to add that it's also one of the countries with the lowest CO2 intensity of GDP. And of course, the synergy with COP26 is really going to be important. And in this respect, I would like to highlight the unique opportunity that is given by the fact that Italy will have the G20 presidency, the UK, the G7 presidency, and Italy and the UK will co-host and co-organize COP26. With this, I would like to conclude. I would really like to join in Daniele in thanking very much all the people who intervened, all the experts who intervened, and of course the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Compagnia di San Paolo for the kind support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luca. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. We will definitely have the chance to focus more on these topics in the future. So we look forward to organizing new events on this and to involving our experts and leading institutions on this. Thanks again and have a nice day. Goodbye.